I found my father's real will in a safety deposit box I didn't even know existed. My stepmom had told the probate court she inherited everything. She'd been living in my dad's paid-off house for 6 months, spending his $500,000 life insurance policy, while I grieved and struggled to pay rent. She forged documents, she lied to lawyers, she lied to me, and she almost got away with it. Let me back up. My name is Jake, and I'm 25 years old. 6 months ago, my dad died of a heart attack. He was only 52. One day he was fine, coaching Little League and planning a fishing trip, and the next day he collapsed at work and never woke up. The doctor said it was a massive coronary event, that he probably didn't feel any pain, that it was quick. I don't know if they say that to everyone or if it was true, but it didn't make it hurt any less. My dad and I were close. My biological mom left when I was 3, just walked out one day and never came back. Dad raised me alone for years, working double shifts as an electrician to make sure I had everything I needed. When I was 12, he married Linda. She seemed nice enough at first. She cooked dinner, kept the house clean, smiled at me during family photos. But there was always something off about her, something cold behind her eyes. Dad didn't see it, or maybe he didn't want to see it. He was just happy to have someone, I think, happy to not be alone anymore. I moved out when I was 22. Got my own apartment, started working as a graphic designer at a small agency. Dad and I still talked every week, still did our fishing trips, still watched football together on Sundays. Linda was always there, hovering, but we worked around her. That was our relationship. I tolerated her for Dad's sake, and she tolerated me because she had to. When Dad died, I was destroyed, completely shattered. I took a week off work and basically didn't leave my apartment except for the funeral. Linda planned everything, which I appreciated at the time because I couldn't function. She chose the casket, the flowers, the music. She gave a eulogy about how much she loved him, how he was her soulmate, how lost she was without him. I gave a eulogy too, but I barely remember what I said. I was crying too hard. After the funeral, Linda told me we needed to talk about Dad's estate. We met at the house I'd grown up in. She sat me down at the kitchen table, the same table where Dad had helped me with homework, where we'd eaten thousands of meals together, and she slid some papers across to me. She told me Dad had left everything to her. The house, the life insurance, his savings, everything. She said it was because they were married, that it was automatic, that this was just how things worked. I was young and stupid and grieving, so I believed her. She showed me some documents that looked official, with legal language I didn't understand. She said she'd filed everything with probate court already, that it was all taken care of. I asked if Dad had left me anything. She said he'd wanted to, but they'd never gotten around to updating his will after they got married. She said I could have some of his personal items, his fishing gear, his watch collection, things like that. She made it sound like she was being generous, like she was doing me a favor. I took the fishing gear and left. I didn't fight it because I didn't know I could fight it. I didn't know anything about estates or wills or probate. I just knew my dad was gone and my stepmom had inherited everything, and I had to figure out how to keep living. The next few months were rough. I was depressed, barely functioning at work, struggling to pay my bills because I'd taken unpaid leave and my savings were depleted. Meanwhile, Linda was living it up. I saw her posts on social media, new car, expensive dinners, a vacation to Hawaii, designer handbags. She was spending Dad's life insurance money like it was nothing, like it was hers, like she'd earned it. Something started bothering me about the whole situation. Dad had always been so careful about planning, about making sure things were taken care of. He'd talked to me about his life insurance once, years ago, mentioned that he wanted to make sure I'd be okay if anything happened to him. Would he really have left me with nothing? I started asking questions. I called a lawyer, a guy named Robert Chen, who'd helped my roommate with a car accident case. I explained the situation, and he went quiet for a long moment. He asked if I'd seen the actual will. I told him I'd seen some documents Linda had shown me, but I didn't have copies. He asked if I'd been to probate court, if I had seen what was filed there. I said no. He told me I needed to go to probate court immediately. He said that in most states, wills are public record once they're filed for probate. He said I had a right to see what was filed, especially as the biological son of the deceased. He gave me the address of the courthouse and told me to ask for the probate division. I went the next day. The probate court was in the basement of the county courthouse, a depressing fluorescent-lit space with beige walls and worn carpet. I waited in line behind an elderly woman arguing about some paperwork, and then I approached the clerk's window. I gave them my father's name and date of death. The clerk, a tired-looking woman in her 50s, typed into her computer and pulled up his case. She asked what I needed. I told her I wanted to see the will that was filed. I wanted copies of everything. She printed out a stack of papers and handed them to me. The filing fee was $20. I paid it and took the papers to a quiet corner of the lobby to read. The will was short, barely 2 pages. It left everything to Linda: the house, the life insurance, his truck, his bank accounts, everything. It was dated 3 months before Dad died and was supposedly signed by him in front of 2 witnesses I'd never heard of. Something felt wrong. The language was weird, formal in a way Dad never talked, and the signature looked off. I'd seen Dad's signature thousands of times on birthday cards and permission slips and checks. This one was close, but not quite right. The loops were wrong. The pressure was different. I took photos of everything with my phone and sent them to Robert. He called me an hour later. He said we might have a case for will forgery. He said if I could prove this wasn't Dad's real will, we could challenge it in probate court. But we'd need evidence. We'd need the real will, if one existed. I started searching. I went through all of Dad's personal items that Linda had let me take. I searched his fishing gear, his tackle boxes, his old files. Nothing. I called his friends, asked if he'd ever mentioned a will or a lawyer. His best friend Mike told me Dad had used a lawyer named Patricia Morrison years ago for some contract work, but he didn't know if she'd done estate planning. I found Patricia Morrison in the phone book. Her office was in a small strip mall 20 minutes from Dad's house. When I called, her receptionist said she was retired, but still checked her office voicemail occasionally. I left a message explaining who I was and asking if my father had been a client. She called me back 2 days later. Yes, she remembered my father. Yes, she'd drafted a will for him about 8 years ago. She'd advised him to update it after he got married, but he'd never come back. She didn't have a copy because her files had been destroyed when she closed her practice, but she remembered the general terms. He'd left everything to me. I asked if she knew where he would have kept the original. She said people usually kept originals in safety deposit boxes or fireproof safes at home. Some people left copies with their lawyer, but Dad hadn't done that. A safety deposit box. I remembered Dad mentioning one years ago, but I'd forgotten about it. He kept important documents there, he'd said, birth certificates and titles and things like that. But I didn't know which bank or how to access it. I called every bank in town. Most of them couldn't tell me anything due to privacy laws, but one bank manager was sympathetic. She looked up my father's name and confirmed he'd had a safety deposit box at their branch. However, only authorized signers could access it, and according to their records, the only authorized signer was my father. I asked what happened to safety deposit boxes when someone died. She explained that typically the executor of the estate could access them with proper documentation. The executor. According to the forged will Linda had filed, she was the executor. She could access the box anytime she wanted. If the real will was in there, she could destroy it. I told Robert this, and he moved fast. He filed an emergency petition with probate court, arguing that there was reason to believe the filed will was fraudulent and requesting that the safety deposit box be sealed pending investigation. He argued that I, as the biological son, had standing to challenge the will. He submitted Patricia Morrison's affidavit confirming she drafted a different will years ago. The probate judge granted a temporary order. The bank was instructed not to allow anyone, including Linda, to access the box until a hearing could be held. The hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. Linda found out, obviously. She called me screaming. She accused me of being greedy, of disrespecting my father's wishes, of trying to steal from her. She said she was his wife, that she had rights, that I was nothing but a jealous child who couldn't accept that Daddy had moved on. I hung up on her. The 2 weeks until the hearing were the longest of my life. I couldn't sleep. I kept imagining scenarios where the real will wasn't in the box, where I was wrong, where I'd humiliated myself and damaged my relationship with my stepmom for nothing. But I also kept looking at that signature on the filed will, and I knew something was wrong. The hearing was on a Tuesday morning. Robert and I sat on one side of the courtroom. Linda and her lawyer, an expensive-looking guy in a three-piece suit, sat on the other. The judge was a stern older man named Judge Patterson, who looked like he'd heard every excuse and lie imaginable. Linda's lawyer argued that this was a frivolous challenge from a disgruntled son who couldn't accept his father's final wishes. He said the will had been properly executed with 2 witnesses and filed appropriately with probate court. He said I was wasting everyone's time. Robert presented Patricia Morrison's affidavit and argued that the signature on the filed will appeared forged. He requested that the court order the safety deposit box opened in the presence of court officers and all parties to determine if other estate planning documents existed. Judge Patterson asked Linda directly if she knew whether her husband had a safety deposit box. She hesitated for just a fraction of a second too long before saying she didn't know. The judge noticed. He granted Robert's motion. We went to the bank that afternoon. Me, Robert, Linda, her lawyer, and a court-appointed officer who would inventory whatever we found. The bank manager led us to the vault, a secure room lined with small metal doors. She used a master key and Dad's key, which had been found in his personal effects, to open box number 347. Inside was a manila envelope. The court officer pulled it out and opened it on a table in the viewing room while we all watched. Inside were several documents: Dad's birth certificate, his discharge papers from the Army, the title to his truck, and a will. The will was dated 10 years ago, 2 years before Dad married Linda. It was 8 pages long, professionally drafted on Patricia Morrison's letterhead. I watched Linda's face go pale as the court officer read the terms aloud. The will left everything to me. The house, all bank accounts, any life insurance proceeds, his vehicle, his tools, everything. It named me as the sole beneficiary and the executor of his estate. It was signed by Dad, and the signature was perfect. I'd know that signature anywhere. It was witnessed by 2 of Dad's co-workers, guys I knew, guys who would testify if needed. There was also a letter, handwritten, addressed to me. The court officer asked if I wanted him to read it aloud, but I said no. That was private. He noted its existence for the record and handed it to me. I folded it and put it in my pocket to read later. Linda's lawyer was arguing before the court officer had even finished inventorying the box. He claimed this will was outdated, that wills made before marriage are typically automatically revoked, that Dad's marriage to Linda had superseded this document. Robert calmly explained that in our state, marriage only automatically revokes provisions in favor of a former spouse, not provisions in favor of children from before the marriage. Since this will was made before Linda, it remained valid unless Dad had executed a new will after marriage. And had Dad executed a valid will after marriage? That was the question. The document Linda had filed claimed to be from 3 months before Dad's death. But was it real? Robert requested, right there in the bank, that the court officer compare the signature on the filed will to the signature on the real will from the safety deposit box. The officer held them side by side. Even to my untrained eye, the differences were obvious. The real will had Dad's natural signature, the one I'd seen my whole life. The filed will had something close but wrong, like someone had traced it but couldn't quite capture the flow. The officer made notes. He took photos. He said he'd be submitting a report to Judge Patterson recommending handwriting analysis. Linda started crying. Not sad crying, angry, desperate crying. She said this wasn't fair, that Dad had promised to take care of her, that she'd given up her career to be his wife. Her lawyer tried to quiet her, but she kept going. She said I was trying to make her homeless, that I was heartless, that Dad would be ashamed of me. I looked at her and felt nothing. No pity, no anger, just cold determination. We left the bank with the court officer taking custody of all the documents for evidence. Robert told me this changed everything. We now had proof of a valid will, leaving everything to me. The burden was on Linda to prove her will was legitimate, and given the signature discrepancies, that was going to be nearly impossible. The next hearing was 3 weeks later. In that time, Robert subpoenaed the 2 witnesses who'd supposedly signed Linda's will. One of them was a woman named Grace Turner, who lived 2 towns over. When Robert's investigator found her, she was confused. She'd never witnessed any will. She'd never even met my father. Her name had been forged, too. The second witness was even more interesting. He'd been dead for 5 years. His name was Walter Chen, and he died in a car accident long before Linda claimed Dad signed this will. She'd pulled his name from somewhere, probably an obituary, and forged his signature, too. At the hearing, Robert presented all of this to Judge Patterson. The forged signatures, the fake witnesses, the real will from the safety deposit box, a handwriting expert who testified that the signature on Linda's will was not authentic. Linda's lawyer tried to argue that maybe Dad had signed it, but the witnesses were added later by someone at the lawyer's office, some kind of administrative error. It was desperate and unbelievable, and Judge Patterson wasn't having it. The judge declared Linda's will fraudulent. He validated the will from the safety deposit box as Dad's true last will and testament. He appointed me as the executor of the estate, issuing letters testamentary that gave me legal authority to act on behalf of Dad's estate, and he referred the matter to the district attorney's office for potential criminal charges of fraud and forgery. Linda sat in that courtroom and watched everything she'd stolen fall apart. Her lawyer was packing up his briefcase, probably calculating how much money he could still extract from her before abandoning ship. She looked at me with pure hatred, and I looked back with nothing. She'd tried to rob me of my father's final gift. She'd forged documents. She'd lied to the court. And she'd almost gotten away with it. But now came the hard part. As executor, I had the legal right to take control of Dad's house. Linda was living there, had been living there for 6 months, treating it like her own. I needed to evict her. Robert explained the process. Since she'd been living there under a fraudulent claim of ownership, she was essentially a squatter despite being Dad's widow. I could file for eviction, but it might take months to go through the courts, or I could offer her cash for keys, paying her to leave voluntarily. Given that she was probably facing criminal charges, she might take the money and run. I didn't want to give her a dime, but I also didn't want to wait months. Robert suggested a middle ground, offer her 30 days to vacate voluntarily. If she refused, we'd file for immediate eviction and seek damages for her unlawful occupation of my property. I wrote the letter myself, formal, cold, legal. It informed her that as the executor of the estate and sole beneficiary under my father's valid will, I was claiming ownership of the property. She had 30 days to remove all her belongings and return the keys. If she failed to do so, I would take legal action and hold her responsible for any costs incurred. Robert served her with the letter through a process server. She had it within 24 hours. She called me at 2 a.m, drunk and screaming. She said I was ruining her life. She said she had nowhere to go. She said I was heartless and cruel, and my father would hate me for what I was doing to his wife. I told her she forged a will and tried to steal my inheritance. She made her choices. Now she could live with the consequences. I hung up and blocked her number. 3 weeks passed. She didn't leave. Robert filed for eviction in civil court, and we got a hearing date within 10 days. This time, there was no ambiguity. I had letters testamentary proving I was the executor and owner of Dad's estate assets. Linda had no legal claim to the house. The judge granted the eviction order, giving her 72 hours to vacate or be forcibly removed by the sheriff's department. On the 72nd hour, she still hadn't left. I met the sheriff's deputies at the house at 9 a.m. There were 2 of them, both looking bored and tired, like this was just another Tuesday. Robert was there too, in case any legal issues arose. We knocked on the door. No answer. The deputies knocked louder, announcing their presence in the eviction order. Still no answer. One of the deputies called for a locksmith to meet us there if she wouldn't open the door voluntarily. Finally, after 10 minutes of knocking, Linda opened the door. She looked awful. Her hair was unwashed, her clothes wrinkled, her eyes bloodshot. She'd been drinking. I could smell it. The house behind her was a disaster. Boxes everywhere, dishes piled in the sink, trash bags lining the hallway. One deputy read her the eviction order and told her she needed to leave immediately. She could take essential personal items now and arrange to collect the rest later, but she needed to leave the premises. Linda looked at me standing behind the deputies. She asked if I was happy now, if this was what I wanted, to see her destroyed and homeless. I told her I wanted my father's house back, the house he'd left to me, the house she'd tried to steal. She called me terrible things. The deputies warned her to calm down or they'd arrest her for disturbing the peace. She grabbed a suitcase that was already packed by the door and shoved past all of us. She got into her new car, the one she'd bought with Dad's life insurance money, and drove away. The deputies watched her leave and then asked if I wanted them to stay while I changed the locks. I said yes. The locksmith arrived 20 minutes later and changed every lock on every door. I paid him in cash and thanked the deputies for their help. Then, I was alone in my father's house for the first time since his funeral. I walked through the rooms slowly, seeing what Linda had done to the place. She'd redecorated, thrown out Dad's furniture and replaced it with modern pieces that didn't match the house's character. She'd painted over the growth chart on the kitchen doorframe, where Dad had marked my height every year. She'd thrown out his photo albums, and I found them in the trash outside, water-damaged and ruined. I sat down on the living room floor and finally read the letter Dad had left in the safety deposit box. It was dated the same day as the will, 10 years ago, written in his messy handwriting. He wrote that he hoped I never had to read this letter, that he hoped we'd have years and years together before I needed to think about his estate. But if I was reading it, that meant he was gone, and he wanted me to know how proud he was of me, how much he loved me, how everything he'd worked for was so I could have a better life than he'd had. He wrote about teaching me to fish, about watching me graduate high school, about the man he knew I'd become. He wrote that the house was mine because it was full of our memories, and he wanted me to have a place to come home to. He wrote that he'd worked hard to make sure I'd be taken care of, that the life insurance money could help me buy a home or start a business or whatever I wanted to do with my life. He signed it, "Love always, Dad," with a smiley face, which was such a Dad thing to do that I started crying. I sat on the floor of his house, my house now, and cried until I couldn't breathe. Over the next few weeks, I cleaned out Linda's things. Most of it I donated. Some of it I trashed. I found evidence that she'd sold some of Dad's tools and memorabilia, things that should have been mine. I documented everything for the ongoing criminal investigation. The district attorney did end up charging her. Forgery, fraud, perjury in probate court? She tried to plead out, but the DA wasn't interested in a lenient deal. She'd committed multiple felonies in her attempt to steal my inheritance. The case was still ongoing last I heard, but her public defender wasn't optimistic about her chances. As executor, I had to handle all of Dad's financial affairs. I collected his life insurance payout, $500,000, deposited it into an estate account. I paid off the few remaining debts he had, mostly credit cards with small balances. I filed the final tax returns. I followed every rule and procedure, documented everything, submitted regular accountings to probate court. Finally, after 6 months of being executor, the estate was ready to close. I filed the final accounting with Judge Patterson's court showing all assets collected, all debts paid, and the remaining assets ready for distribution to the sole beneficiary. Me. The judge approved it. The estate was closed. The house was transferred into my name alone. The life insurance money, minus estate expenses, was mine. Dad's truck, his tools, his personal effects, everything was officially mine. I sold my apartment and moved into Dad's house. My house. I repainted it, fixing Linda's awful decorating choices. I hung up photos of Dad and me. I set up his fishing gear in the garage. I made it home again. With the life insurance money, I paid off my student loans. I put a large chunk into savings and investments, wanting to be responsible like Dad would have wanted. And I started a small business, a design studio, something I'd always dreamed of doing but never had the capital to start. Dad's gift gave me that opportunity. Sometimes I drive past Linda's apartment complex. She's living in a small one-bedroom place on the bad side of town, working as a cashier at a grocery store from what I heard. Her criminal trial is coming up soon. She might end up in prison. Part of me feels like I should feel bad for her, but I don't. She made her choices. I think about how close she came to getting away with it. If I hadn't questioned things, if I hadn't found Robert, if I hadn't remembered the safety deposit box, she'd have everything right now. She'd be living in Dad's house, spending his life insurance money, and I'd have nothing but some fishing gear and a watch collection. But I did question things. And I fought for what Dad wanted me to have, and now I'm living the life he worked so hard to give me. People ask if I'm angry about what Linda did. Honestly, I'm past anger. I'm just grateful I found the truth before it was too late. Grateful for probate courts and letters testamentary and judges who take fraud seriously. Grateful for lawyers like Robert who fight for justice. Grateful for my dad, who loved me enough to plan for my future even after he was gone. The house is full of his memory. Every room reminds me of him. The backyard where we'd throw baseball. The garage where he taught me to change oil. The kitchen where we'd make pancakes on Saturday mornings. It's not just property, it's home. It's my inheritance, not just financially, but emotionally, and nobody could take that away from me. Not even Linda with all her forgeries and lies. That's my story. The evil stepmom who forged a will. The real will, hidden in a safety deposit box. The probate court battle. The eviction. The justice. It reads like a movie script, but it was my life for 8 months. The worst 8 months. Trying to honor my father's memory while fighting off someone who'd tried to steal everything he'd worked for. If you're reading this and you've lost someone, check the probate filings. Make sure everything is legitimate. Don't assume anything. Don't trust anyone, even family, especially when money is involved. Get a lawyer. Fight for what's rightfully yours. Because people like Linda exist, and they count on you being too grieving or too trusting to question them. I questioned everything. And it saved my inheritance. It saved my father's legacy. And it gave me justice. Sometimes the system works.